London, during the summer of 1888, an event happened, or a series of events happened, which shook the nation, if not the world. These were the murders of 5 particular women. Their names were Mary Ann Nichols, who was murdered in August, Annie Chapman, murdered in September, and then there was one night there were the 2 murders. That was of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. That was again in September. And Mary Jane Kelly was in November of 1888. We still don't know who did these murders.
Wasn't me.
You might be old, but you're not that old. Yeah, it was a series of events that probably shook the world. Mass communications, not quite as we know it today, was becoming into its own. And these murders were in fact being reported again across the Atlantic in America, as close as they could in real time with telegraph, etc. The police at the time were trying their best to investigate. There's been lots of accusations about the police being incompetent. Modern policing, as we know it today, was just in its infancy, and that did include forensic science or forensic policing and understanding of psychiatry and lots of other factors. And the training of the police probably wasn't as good as it should have been, or would be considered very, very bad by today's standards. Whatever you might think of some of the police today, they're better trained. It is an incredible story. It's something which has fascinated me since I was about 12 years old. Because of that, I'm very restrictive of how much I'm going to talk about it. I'm just going to lay down some bare facts. Now, the East End at the time, London at the time, was just a great big slum, in effect. It was an industrial area. A lot of the people there were working class, what we call working class today, and possibly if you can get lower than working class, they were there as well. There wasn't really any social support as we would not understand it today. There were charities that tried to help people. Options for people were very, very limited. If you grew up into a poor family, that's probably where you would remain. What we have to remember is this time in London, London was the capital city of the most powerful or biggest, most powerful empire that there'd ever been, and probably really saw some of the worst poverty. And that's just not talking as a extreme socialism or anything, it's absolutely true. When you see photographs of the time and read contemporary reports, I mean, just before these events, a few years, about 20 years before, Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist. Things hadn't really changed since those times. There didn't really seem an awful lot that the authorities wanted to do about this big poverty, or this big, the poverty divide in the UK. You did have your very, very wealthy, you had your very, very poor. There's some people that were in between. It was probably a time when the middle classes were actually growing. Start doing anything particularly social history of it all. So you can imagine very limited medical support for the poor, very, very basic medical support if you were wealthy, of understanding. There are many diseases that even the wealthy caught. I mean, a few years later, remember that the Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, had actually died of typhoid. So, again, nobody was immune from anything. So, our understanding. So, getting back to the social side of it, all these things. What was particularly outstanding about these murders, which, surprisingly enough, there weren't that many murders in the East End of London, in fact, across London that many people would think they would have been. But these murders, even by today's standards, were very horrific. These poor women, and we've got to remember they're victims, and I know there is a habit amongst some people that study this subject to forget that these are actually victims of a violent crime, died in quite a horrific way. Probably the only saving grace to it all is that they died quickly. I'm not suggesting that's good. I'm just suggesting that's one positive in it all. They all seem to have their throats cut almost through to the bone, apart from the final victim I'll come to in a minute. The genitalia area was mutilated and certain organs were removed. And I'm not going into too much horrific details. One of the organs, which was a kidney that had been removed, it's alleged was sent to a gentleman who set himself up as the chairman of the vigilante committee, a guy called Lusk. Apparently, I believe he received half a kidney from one of the victims. Again, it fitted. We don't know if that was the actual kidney. There would have been no way at the time of actually knowing, really. Allegedly, the killer, in a letter that was written at the time, claimed to have eaten the other half. Yeah, it all seems a bit extreme. But again, some of these letters do seem to have facts that would only be known to the police and the killer themselves. The name the killer eventually received was of Jack the Ripper. And this was actually from a letter that had been sent to the media. It's probably unlikely the actual letter came from the killer themselves, although it has been known that, probably he may have been trying to, or they may have been trying to wind the police up or send a message or notoriety. It is unlikely. I mean, there's other letters that one was signed from hell. And there are other letters as well. So again, the police had an awful lot of information and things to deal with, which was probably a shock to them at the time. A couple of things that are of interest with these murder scenes was on the night of the double murder, that was Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. When Elizabeth Stride was being murdered, the murderer may have been disturbed. It's happened in a guy with a horse and trap came into the yard. He saw what he thought was some rags on the ground. He went up, obviously saw a horrific sight, went off to get some help. I think his horse was actually reluctant to go into the yard, which he did every night. So, the horse sensed something was wrong. It's thought that he actually probably got a lucky escape by not sticking around, but going to get some additional help, because the murderer was probably still in this particular area and would have probably been carrying a knife, and you can imagine what he'd have done. He probably wouldn't have wanted any witnesses. Well, for whatever reason, the murderer didn't feel fulfilled or wanted to continue with his work for the night. It is referred to as work. And he made his way to another location, which was Mitre Square, which is about probably half a mile away. And there he murdered Catherine Eddowes. He must have been very quick, because in the area of Mitre Square was industrial areas, and the police had to do a patrol of there every 15 minutes because it was such a high crime rate. So a policeman passed there, if you can imagine. He came round, did his loot, came back 15 minutes later, and probably almost stumbled over the body of another unfortunate victim within 15 minutes. Which again suggests that the way it was mutilated, the body was mutilated, the guy didn't guess, the murderer didn't guess he was able to do his job quite quickly. Well, okay, the policeman raised the alarm. He had a friend who worked in a nearby premises. His actual words were, "He's got another one." So yeah, it was horrific to see. Now it's interesting that on this night there was a message was found chalked on a nearby wall, which literally says, "The Jews are the people, or the Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." It's a very strange message, very cryptic. Jews are spelled Jews. Now, the commanding officer, Charles Warren, actually came down. Although there was a difference between the London police force and the City of London police force, and although it wasn't in his jurisdiction, he had this message removed from the wall. And there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about this. The fact it was recorded, and I can understand his reasoning that he wouldn't have wanted anything that could incite problems or allegations. It was already tense, removed. He'd have probably done it with agreement of another senior person in the adjoining police force. Well, that aside, it's just interesting that the way it was written. I believe JEWES has actually been attributed to a society of people or a society. I've not found anything on the internet since I've read this. I read this in a book somewhere. I can't find the book now. But yeah, it's an interesting thing of note. Yeah, but the police, needless to say, were still clueless. They had another two bodies on their hands and didn't know what to do. Well, that was in September of 1888. We now move forward to November 1888. And the final victim, what we call the Conical Five, has been attributed to Jack the Ripper. We're calling him now. And that was of Mary Jane Kelly. Unlike the other victims, she actually was worked on indoors. She had her own room. She was considerably younger than a lot of the other victims, which shows that the murderer wasn't particularly fussy about age. And yeah, so she was horrifically murdered, to put it quite honestly, without going into too many details. And there is a picture that still exists today of her murder scene, which was one of the first pictures used at a crime scene, first photographs taken at a crime scene. Really, she was flayed alive. Her skin was removed. Internal organs were removed and put at various places around the room. I mean, literally, I believe it was her kidneys and liver were put on a bedside table. Other organs were hung up around the room like decorations. Quite a horrific scene. She was actually discovered by someone working for her landlord who wanted his rent money. I think she was living with someone at the time, a guy, and they'd had an argument and he'd left. So yeah, and she needed money. So yeah, she probably could charge a bit more for where she was, and yeah, the circumstances. It's probable because the Ripper was not going to be disturbed. He was probably able to spend more time fulfilling some weird fantasy, which then brings me on to the psychology of Jack the Ripper. Without coming in stating the obvious, yes, he was a crazy guy, it would appear. There has been the FBI, for a film company in the 1980s, actually did a psychological profile about him, and it is available online on the FBI archives if anyone wants to research it. It is quite gruesome read, or quite fascinating reading, but quite gruesome as well. It's an overview that was written for a production company. Now, there have been several suspects touted throughout the years. Notable one was Walter Sickert, who was a painter, an artist. And the reason they say that, he actually painted a picture called, I think, The Ripper's Bedroom or The Ripper's Room. And he did paint some quite Gothic type paintings.
Yeah, in the case of this guy, they said that it could have been him that sent the letters to the police. He could have been an accomplice. He sent the letters to the police, but he didn't actually do the murders. So, you know, that's him out of the way.
Yeah. The next one, funny enough, is Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland. No real evidence, so you can keep enjoying the books and the films without worrying too much about there being a dark side to the author. It came about because of a novel. Somebody wrote a novel about it, or a book about it, him and a friend and accomplice. I don't think there's any real evidence on that. I can't think why anyone would actually make that. One of the most strange ones, or one if you really want to go down a conspiracy route, was Prince Albert Victor. Yeah, you know I'm going with this. Who's the grandson of Queen Victoria. Now, yes, even then, in the 1880s, there were conspiracy theories and things about the royal family. He is meant to have fathered a child, an illegitimate child. Which
as they do.
Yeah, well, okay, we know that. It would have been a bit inconvenient, especially then. And the conspiracy goes that the secret was probably known by some women in the area. The child was possibly that of a prostitute or somebody who knew one of the unfortunate victims. And it was a clear-up operation. It's unlikely it was done, if it was this, it was done by Prince Albert himself, because apparently he was travelling a lot, or he was out the area, or in various institutions, or being seen to by medical people, whatever. Yeah, he had a few issues, I believe. So, yeah, and again, there's meant to have been a certain society that's meant to have been keeping this quiet. Again, no real evidence, really good speculation. I find it very, very difficult to swallow this, if you like. There'd be easier ways to dispose of, if you like, literally bodies than do this, unless you wanted to send a warning, definitely like a gangland warning. Again, why would anyone want to send a gangland warning? If they knew, they could be clearing the streets or clearing up people they knew would probably know. And these people were the lowest steps of society, or considered to be. But again, no real evidence. It still seems to keep going round and round. I mean, I've seen a couple of films and TV series with it in. One notable, really good film was Murder by Decree, filmed in the 1970s. Christopher Plummer and James Mason. I recommend it. Possibly totally impossible, but a damn good film. Very atmospheric for the time. And there's been Christopher Plummer plays Sherlock Holmes, so it ticks another box for me personally. There is one notable, probably the prime suspect, and that's a guy called Klemensky, who was a Polish Jew.
He was a barber.
Yeah.
Mentally unstable, and he hated women. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we know about the one. Yeah, he's a famous one, and he's a favourite, as it were. And again, circumstances. Again, it's circumstantial. Things happened to him. He disappeared, and the murder stopped. I don't think you could point a finger and say you are the murderer. I mean, there was other things. There was an apron taken from one of the victims by a policeman. Remember, the police at that time didn't have any real good training, and certainly didn't understand forensic science at the time. This apron is meant to have had some forensic tests done, paid for by a wealthy person. And they've actually taken some DNA, I think, from Kamensky's descendants and found his DNA on it. You can research, yeah, if you want to research that. Very, very difficult to prove. I mean, how would you know? So, with that, I mean, I could talk a lot more about this, but I'm going to hand it over to Steve to probably just finish off if he's got any questions or any other thoughts about this particular subject.
At the time, totty prostitutes were not as well regarded as they aren't today. They were full of disease because at that time the health standards were a lot less stringent as they are today. And so when you're talking about the murdering of prostitutes, it's almost like saying you've run a dog over. It isn't really. I mean, it's horrifying because it's a human being, and their entrails were exposed. Let's put it like this. But however, as it was only totty, some come, some go, and there you are. You were talking about the police coming, doing the rounds every 15 minutes. Well, I'm not too sure that it was by the clock. I don't think that Jack, he waited for policemen to go round, knew he had 15 minutes, and knew he had to act quickly. I think the rounds by the beats of the policemen were sporadic and not necessarily by the clock. I just think he was lucky. But anyway, going on, you were talking about the suspects. Well, you were missing the American connection, of course.
Yeah.
So one of the suspects was Richard Mansfield. He was an actor who went to England to buy a theatre, to take a theatre company to present the play Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, he played his role as Dr. Jekyll really, really well. And people left the theatre screaming, a little bit like The Exorcist did in the movie theatres in the 70s.
Yeah.
People were leaving the theatres thinking they were possessed.
Yeah.
And and some people are suspecting that he took his work home with him. He was so convincing on his role on the stage that he might have taken it. He might have overacted at home. Because the first murder was on the day after, I believe, that his first night in the theatre company.
Yeah, I mean, there'd been extreme method acting if it was him.
Right. Well, you can never tell. And when he went back to the US at the end, the murders stopped. So that's one theory. You've also got Dr. Francis Tumblety.
Tumblety, yeah.
Yeah, and he was a quack doctor. He went to the UK selling his snake oil, very much like the vitamins and stuff that they sell on the TV these days. Take these sun-dried mushrooms, and it'll cure cancer. Which was some of the what was being sold on Brazilian TV not all that many years ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, he went to the UK and he arrived just before the killings.
Yeah.
And he was arrested, this guy, for lewd acts during that time period. He was misbehaving. He must have been misbehaving in public, And shortly after the last murder, Tumblety, he left the UK and went back to the US. It could be that he was trying to impress other doctors. I
Mm,
believe that there was a doctor friend of his who wanted a certain body part.
mm,
He might have, taken it out and sent it to his doctor friend. I
but
don't know, I wasn't there.
well,
So
no, this is it. Yeah, okay, I feel bad. Something, yeah, it's awful. These women died in a horrific way. I know
yeah,
it's it's quick, but it's still horrific. And
Mr. Holmes, not
yeah,
Sherlock.
no.
He was a serial killer in the US, in
Mm,
the
mm,
city of Chicago in Illinois,
mm,
and he killed
mm,
20 people.
mm,
He killed 20 people, uh, and he went to the UK too.
mm.
So could it be him?
Well,
Uh, Montague John Druitt.
mm,
He was a teacher,
yeah,
uh, and he was suspected until he committed suicide in the Thames.
yeah.
He threw himself into the Thames. Um, David Cohen.
Mm,
Here's an interesting
mm,
one. David Cohen, Polish guy.
mm,
He was found wandering the streets in the UK. Well, in London, of course.
mm.
And when I say UK, I mean London, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
He was found wandering the streets in London, and
Mm,
he was sent to the workhouse to
mm.
try
Yeah,
to
not
sustain
something
himself.
to.
David Cohen was not his real name,
Mm,
right? It's a pseudonym that the Polish people give.
mm.
It's a little bit like the Americans saying John Doe.
Yeah,
He was a Polish guy, unknown. So here you've got a list of other alternative suspects.
yeah,
Uh, the thing is that the story has been twisted and turned and
yeah.
molested for so long
Mm,
that you're never going to know. You're never going to know who it was, who was Jack the Ripper. You're going to get experts
yeah,
who,
recovered.
who
Yeah.
want to who want to give their view, but
Mm.
that's just to release another book.
Yeah, there is this issue with it. Yes, no, I've known about all this since about 12, watched films and things, and it's a fascinating subject, and I think that's it because yeah, we don't talk about Holmes much because they know who he was. Um, this is an enduring story. When you go to London, probably leaving from Tower Hill on any night, there's 10 to 15, even 20 tours of Jack the Ripper sites.
Yeah, of course there are. Well, look,
Yeah, yeah,
nobody wants a story to die
yeah.
because they'll be out of a job.
Yeah.
We don't even know for sure that the story is true
Well, we know
because
the murders happened. Yeah,
no, we don't. We don't. Because back then, the records were difficult to keep. It's a story. You don't know if all of them were linked to one another.
exactly.
That's the
Well,
first.
yeah,
That's the first thing.
yeah, of course,
You
yeah.
don't know for sure it's the same person.
Well,
You don't know, and you don't know which person it wasn't. So
yeah.
what you're
this is.
going to do? It makes a good story. It certainly
Yeah.
does.
A lot of
It
them
certainly
drunk in.
does.
A lot of the victims drunk in one bar called the 10 Bells, which was renamed in the anniversary of Jack the Ripper. I was drunk in there, by the
In
way.
that case, it could have been the barman. Did they pay
Yeah,
the tab? Did they
yeah,
pay their
yeah.
tab?
Yeah, I know. This is the point. Yeah, I know. It's a complete. That's it. It's a mystery. What it did do, and this is
Well, not
the
really.
whole. I mean,
I wouldn't say it's a
that
mystery.
what I find is interesting. It actually drew attention to the conditions that these people lived in what was the most, as I started at the beginning of this podcast, the wealthiest city in the world, the centre of the biggest empire the world had ever
Yes,
known,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and it had some of the worst poverty
Yes, yeah. Well, just
imaginable.
read the story, The Tale of Two Cities
Yeah,
in France.
yeah, and it drew attention. If there's anything good about it, there was reform started because of it, and yeah, the conditions of some of the the places where you slept. Literally, they used to hang a rope. You slept on the rope. You could a few pennies extra. You could sleep in a cot. Yeah, I mean, and women, and as I said at the beginning, women have very little options. They could go into maiding, sewing, seems to be, or into that, or probably a combination of all three. They were probably dipping into it and dipping out of prostitution. I think it was Catherine Eddowes. I think it's always questioned whether Catherine Eddowes at that time was actually a prostitute. Again, it's all speculation. When you said about the policeman doing the rounds, it was actually a requirement around Mitre Square that it was 15 minutes. I know.
It was a requirement that the security guard looked on Epstein.
Yeah.
When he hanged himself in the prison cell.
Yeah, that's a podcast for the future sometime. Hopefully we won't join him if we do that one. It's a again, I find I mean, you've got more of a pragmatic mind about you, which I always find interesting. I wouldn't say I was. I find it interesting. I find it more interesting for the social history side of it and what it leads to, and the more you uncover. I know the areas in London. I've walked across Mitre Square at night because I used to work in London at night, not going around not following Jack the Ripper, by the way, his footstep. But and even at night, when you know what's happened there, and you walk over the actual where the bodies were, and I've never done the Ripper tour walk. I've not done it myself, but yeah, I've been to the areas. And actually do a lesson about it, funny enough, if anyone else is interested. A virtual one. It's I mean, it happened at the end of, 2 centuries ago now, the end of the 1880s. At the end of that. Like I said, it's notable because it's the first crime scene photograph, or one of them that I know about. I think it's actually the first that was ever done of poor old Mary Jane Kelly. Horrific picture, available online, normally with a warning before you open it. Someone's very graciously managed to colorize it for us so we can see it in all its full, or the pictures in all their full Technicolor glory, which is even worse in some ways. I mean, poor woman, that must have, she probably died in some agony, actually, what happened to her. There's even speculation that the Jack the Ripper, we can narrow it down, was actually left-handed with the way the cuts were done. But again, I've read that, and there's still speculation whether that could be.
He could have done it behind his back, behind his own back.
Well,
we never know.
Yeah, there's even speculation it could have been a woman, Jane the Ripper.
Yeah, of course it could.
Yeah. I mean, we're assuming that only men are capable of evil doing and things like this. We're not sexist. We believe, equality. So, yeah, it's it might not even be just one person. There could have been two doing it. Again, it's speculation.
We come back to Kosminski. We come back to Kosminski. They said that he probably wrote the letters, but he didn't actually do the murders. He was complicit. Well, look, there's so many different possibilities, and they've all, I'm sure they've all been published in a book. Sometime or other, which made the authors a fortune.
Well, there's a Ripper encyclopedia if you really want to go into it, and I've got I mean, I had lots of books about murders in the UK. Before I moved to Brazil.
Be careful what you're saying in these
podcasts. Yeah, I did realise it's a hobby of mine. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you said that this Jack the Ripper stuff is since you were 12 years old.
Well, I became aware of it. I'm not saying it's sort of my parents weren't married.